You and Charles Barkley are overrating Luka Doncic. He is not a superstar by any stretch of the imagination.
If he's not a superstar, they aren't in the NBA.
Not everyone has to be a fan of Luka Doncic. You don't have to love his game. You don't have to love his personality. However, the way the NBA media has been treating him since he entered the league is a completely different story. This goes beyond not liking a certain player. After all, media members are humans just like us. We all know they like certain players more, and there is nothing with it as long as it's not openly blatant. Except when it comes to Luka, there seems to be something going on where they just can't wait for an opportunity to tear him down. It doesn't even matter in the slightest if it's deserved or not. Some of the things that we have heard regarding Luka Doncic in the last 6 years have been so bad that it has almost become comical, because we could not even come up with it if we tried. This is why Luka Doncic has had to prove the media wrong over and over again. The clip we just showed you might be one of the worst NBA takes to be uttered in the last decade. Luka Doncic, a 5-time first-team All-NBA, 5-time All-Star, already top 10 in triple-doubles, a scoring title, and multiple season averaging over 30 points per game, is not a superstar. And Skip Bayless said this in May of 2022. Not when Luka was a rookie, when he obviously was not a superstar yet. He said it after Luka averaged 29 points, 9 rebounds, and 9 assists for the season, and in the midst of him carrying a team whose second-best player was an up-and-coming Jalen Brunson to the conference finals. The media hating on Luka is one thing, but this is just egregious. I mean, he did not even have to prove them wrong in this case, because he already had proven them wrong as early as year 2, when made the leap from great rookie to All-NBA first-team caliber player. Shannon Sharpe is right. If Luka is not a superstar, who is? At this point, it just seems like Luka has been so good and so dominant for so long that people take it for granted. If he has a small stretch of bad games or comes out short in the clutch, it will be the #1 thing they talk about the next morning. And yes, one could argue that maybe we should not care so much about what the likes of Stephen A. Smith, Skip Bayless, or Kendrick Perkins say about Luka, or any other player for that matter. Because, let's be honest, how many games do they watch on a daily basis? More than the average die-hard NBA fan? Probably not. You can tell by the stuff they say sometimes on TV. But sadly, how knowledgeable they are is not what really matters. These guys have the loudest voice in the NBA landscape. Everything they say is shared everywhere on social media, and they already have their own TV shows or podcasts. The average casual NBA fan who mostly watches the playoffs and doesn't really watch games in the regular season will most likely listen to what they say and take their words for it. But don't worry, Skip Bayless tells us exactly why Luka Doncic is not a superstar. Let's see. According to him, Luka is a poor shooter by superstar standards. An odd thing to say at this exact moment, considering Luka had just averaged the best 3-point percentage of his career that season at 35%. Even better, in the games he had played in the playoffs so far when Skip said this, Luka shot nearly 40% from 3. Once again, does Doncic even need to prove the media wrong if he already did, and they are just saying stuff for the sake of it? To go even further, you cannot just look at Luka Doncic's shooting percentages and simply compare them to the rest of the league. Do you think 40% from 3 is as impressive if you are PJ Tucker or Luka? There is a clear difference. Luka takes incredibly tough shots, especially from 3. He doesn't take open catches and shoots in the corner. All of them are contested, above-the-break step-backs. As a matter of fact, in that 2022 season, only 21% of Luka's 3-point shots were assisted by teammates. In comparison, if you look at Stephen Curry's unanimous MVP season in 2016, more than half of his threes were assisted. Same goes for Lillard when he averaged 32 points per game a few seasons ago. Luka's playstyle is one of one, and therefore his standards are different. Calling him a poor shooter is definitely not true. And even if it used to be Luka's weakness offensively, if we could even call it a weakness, he has indeed proven Skip Bayless wrong in the 2023-2024 season, as he shot a whopping 38% from 3 on over 10 attempts a game. Now, think about what we just talked about. The difficulty of his shots, which is comparable to pretty much no other player in the league. 38% is not only great, it is amazing. And yet, he's supposed to be a poor shooter. Well, that is one thing proven wrong. But that's not all from that same clip, because yes, Skip seems to have a lot to say about Doncic. To justify Luka not being a superstar, he says he is a turnover machine. I mean, yes, Luka does have a lot of turnovers. In the 2023-2024 season, he led the league in turnovers. But maybe because he was in total assists too? Jokic was 3rd in assists, and also top 10 in turnovers. Sabonis was 4th in assists and 2nd in turnovers. Guys like the Greek Greek Freak, KD, or Anthony Edwards were all top 10 in turnovers despite being nowhere near the top 10 in assists. My point is, if you have the most assists, you are more likely to have the most turnovers. This is like blaming LeBron James for having a lot of missed field goals in his career. Luka is his team's entire offense, even more so before Kyrie came to Dallas. He had the ball in his hands 24/7. Obviously, it eventually leads to turnovers. Does losing the ball 4 times per game when you spend 35 minutes handling it, attempting 21 shots and dish out 9 assists, automatically disqualifies you of superstar status? What are we even talking about here? If that is all you can find to criticize Luka, well, you are going to have to find something better. What about his defense? According to Skip, he's a, and I quote, disaster on this end. Now, I am not going to pretend like Luka is an elite defender. That would be going way too far. More often than not, the main issue is that he is just not 100% focused and kind of lazy. However, a disaster is a very strong word, and he has also proven that statement wrong. We have seen him give his all on multiple defensive possessions in the playoffs when it matters the most. As a matter of fact, when Luka Doncic is on the court during the 2024 postseason, the Dallas Mavericks have a 111 defensive rating. When he's not on the court, they have a 112 defensive rating, which is slightly worse. Now, the sample size is not the same because Luka barely sits on the bench, and it's not an individual stat. However, if Luka was truly a disaster on defense, wouldn't Dallas's defense be at least slightly better when he's off the court? How can Dallas have one of the best defenses in the 2024 playoffs with such an awful defensive player on the court? So many questions that can be answered by something very simple. These analysts are going off of narratives and numbers, nothing else. A last one for the road skip, perhaps. This is from a bit over a year ago, when he said multiple times that Luka and Kyrie will not fit together. They're not a good duo. This one is just an insane take. First of all, saying they won't fit together after they had played like a dozen games together, and before the front office could make any other moves, is just ridiculous. It's not even rushing to conclusions, it's just hating. A year later, Luka has already proved him wrong. Again, they didn't only fit together, they went to the NBA Finals together. And no one truly expected that. I mean, a lot of people definitely had the Mavs as their playoffs dark horse, except for Skip most likely, but no one would have qualified the Mavs' season a failure if they lost in the Western Conference Finals, for instance. At this point, it honestly feels like Skip Bayless just wants Luka Doncic to prove him wrong. Don't worry, it's not just Skip Bayless. This is Stephen A. Smith's list of top 5 point guards back in 2021. Don't get me wrong, this list is full of great players. I'm not saying Luka has to be number 1. But number 5, really? Just take a look at the numbers he averaged. So did Luka prove the media wrong again? Well, this was posted on May 6th. Just a few days later, the 2021 playoffs started. Luka averaged 35 points, 8 rebounds, and 10 assists per game on nearly 50% from the floor and 40% from 3. In a 7-game series against the Los Angeles Clippers and some of the best perimeter defenders of our time. Just your average 5th best point guard in the league output, right? But 2021 is a while ago. Surely NBA analysts have stopped disrespecting Luka, right? Well, this is from November 2023. As you can see, Luka Doncic, who averaged 32 points, 8 rebounds, and 8 assists the season prior, was not a top 5 offensive player according to Kendrick Perkins to start the season. No disrespect to anyone on that list, but how is Jason Tatum a better offensive player than Luka? Curry and Kevin Durant are not quite as well-rounded as Luka when it comes to the offensive side of the ball. This is not a knock on them, because really, who is? Then, Luka went on to be the scoring champion, averaging 33 points per game, as well as being second in assists per game. The kind of feat that can only be accomplished by the best offensive player in the game, right? If that's not proving the media wrong, I don't know what is. Maybe he needs to average a 40 points triple-double in order for Kendrick Perkins to put him in his top 3. Except, criticizing a player on his skill set. His ability as a basketball player is rather common. It happens to everyone. It's also something that you can prove, in a way. It doesn't mean they are always right. I mean, I just showed you how they are often wrong regarding Luka. But as a whole, you can watch someone play and make certain comments that can be backed up. However, when it comes to Luka, they also like to go at his personality, which can sometimes be taken as annoying when he is complaining or whining to refs, but when you are just making up narratives to fit your own agenda.
But it looks like to me, guys love playing with him. I can't say the same for Luka. Porzingis look highly upset. Josh Richardson looks highly upset. Like, the difference between the two is that Trey could get others involved, and he could take a back seat and let others rock out. When I watch Luka, Luka has the ball in his hands 20 of the 24 seconds of the shot clock, and then he's passing the ball to a teammate and putting them in a bad position and saying, just catch and shoot. Trae Young, it feels like it's a joy to play with him.
Yikes. There is a lot to unpack here. Kendrick Perkins said this in the summer of 2021, right after Trae Young made the Eastern Conference Finals, back when Luka hadn't made it out of the first round yet. This take is just completely crazy. Kristaps Porzingis may have not been happy in Dallas, but how can Kendrick Perkins know this is Luka's fault? Especially considering Porzingis came out and said right before the NBA Finals that he had no bad blood against his former team and that he had a good relationship with Luka. And I mean, sure, Luka and Rick could have involved him more in the offense at times. We can also be honest for a second and admit that the Porzingis we saw in Washington and Boston is simply better than the one we saw in Dallas. Luka wasn't making him miss shots and not box out on rebounds. What about Josh Richardson? You tell me. This kind of stuff just makes no sense. First of all, because we can't know for sure what is going on in these players' heads and how they are feeling. Second of all, you could find positive quotes regarding Luka Doncic from the vast majority of Dallas Mavericks players in recent years. Why is that? Well, probably because, just like Trae Young, he makes his teammates better. The Mavs role players get a great amount of open looks every game simply because of Luka's gravity. I'm sure these guys would rather have these kinds of looks than having to create their own shots the whole game. What about stars then? Well, would Kyrie have resigned if he truly didn't like playing with Luka? I'm sure he could have found a new home pretty easily. Except, Kyrie said that it is easy to play alongside someone like him, and called him one of the future best players of all time. And it goes the other way around too. Luka has been very appreciative of his teammates. Yes, sometimes he gets angry at them for very avoidable turnovers, but that's because of how big of a competitor he is. He's also said that the Mavs would not have beaten the Thunder in the playoffs without Derek Lively, or that having Kyrie Irving on his team was a blessing for him on and off the court. Such a locker room cancer, right? Even when it comes to the ball-hogging accusations, Luka has managed to prove Kendrick Perkins wrong. His usage rate in the 2024 playoffs is down to 31%, compared to 35% in the regular season, which was the second highest in the league behind Embiid, even though you have to account for Kyrie's missed games, which forced Luka to do even more offensively. So, in the 2024 postseason, Luka's usage rate is the same as SGA's, barely higher than Jokic and lower than guys like Donovan Mitchell or Jalen Brunson. Why don't these guys get the same treatment? We have seen Luka let Kyrie take over for parts of the game too, but outside of Kyrie, who exactly do you think should have the ball in his hands a lot? This recipe has proved it can work. Yes, Luka has the ball in his hands a ton, but wouldn't you want that from one of the most versatile and gifted offensive players the game has ever seen? Someone who can carry a team's offense on his own? Sure, if Luka played on the Celtics, for instance, with 4 players around him capable of doing stuff with the ball in their hands or off the dribble, I'm sure he would not have the ball in his hands as much as he does now. But he also has to adjust to his teammates, and you cannot ask too much from Derrick Jones Jr. or PJ Washington. So we have seen the media be proven wrong when it comes to his skill set and his personality. What's left then? Well, criticizing for things he has no control over. That is the best example of the lack of honesty from some of these media members when it comes to Doncic. I am sure you have heard, just like me, countless times, the Stephen A. Smiths and Kendrick Perkins of the world try to blame the Porzingis failed experiment or Jalen Brunson not resigning in Dallas on Luka. Is Luka Doncic now the GM and owner of the team? Especially when he has already talked about how he wanted Brunson to stay with the Mavs, but at the end of the day, he's not the one giving out the money. Luka just suffers from a different treatment. Earlier this season, Stephen A. Smith said that SGA can rival Luka Doncic. Okay, why not? And then he said he could eclipse him. I'm not even here to debate that because that is not something that Luka can prove wrong, really. We will have to see in the future, even though they already met in the playoffs and we saw who came out on top. No, what is really interesting is the double standard. Stephen A. Smith and many others refer to SGA as a kid or a young up-and-coming player. As for Luka, he is no longer in that category. He's entering his prime and the expectations are much higher. But what if I told you SGA is older than Luka? Why do they get such different treatments? The truth is, Luka has been so good for so long that these analysts just forget he's 25. The way he's analyzed is unique, but also rather unfair. They absolutely cannot wait for someone to overtake him as the best player in the league. They are trying to push agendas, but the thing is, Luka does not care about agendas and will just answer on the court, as he has always done. And yet, despite all the things I have covered so far, there is one thing that I have not mentioned, but which might be the biggest issue when it comes to the NBA media, Luka Doncic and other international players in the league. the overall xenophobia from certain American analysts, who are not only biased towards American players, which could be fine on its own, but also have a tendency to be way more harsh on foreign-born players. This part is exactly what explains all of the horrendous takes and clearly very biased things that Luka has proven wrong. Sometimes, it just goes too far, though.
When it comes down to guys winning MVP since 1990, it's only 3 guys that won the MVP that wasn't top 10 in scoring. Do you know who those 3 guys were?
Who were they?
Steve Nash, Jokic, and Dirk Nowitzki. Now, what do those guys have in common?
It doesn't take a genius to figure it out. They are all white and also all happen to be international players. And according to Perkins, the media is favoring them. How can this actually be a talking point on one of the biggest NBA shows on TV? This looks like something straight from Fox News. First of all, Jokic was 10th in scoring when he won his first MVP and 6th when he won his second MVP. So this is just straight up incorrect. Mind you, all of this was said last year during the Jokic versus Embiid MVP race. When Dirk won MVP in 2007, he was not top 10 in scoring. That's right, he was 11th. Does that really make that huge of a difference? Steve Nash, though, was nowhere near the top 10 in scoring, but he was the assists leader and the engine of one of the best offenses the game had ever seen. You can also notice he chose 1990 on purpose to avoid Magic Johnson's MVPs, where he clearly wasn't a top 10 scorer. Cherry-picking at its finest. You can tell Perkins just wanted to hate on certain players and tried his hardest to find something to make it work. By insinuating that white and non-American players get more favorable MVP votes, Kendrick Perkins just showed the entire NBA world what he really thinks of them, but also ridiculed himself to the point where no one will most likely listen to what he has to say regarding players like Luka or Nikola. This is the sad reality of NBA media sometimes. Luka Doncic will always suffer from undeserved and even unfounded criticism. Whether it is about his game, his personality, or his team's success, he will always be an easy target, and lies will be spread to tarnish his name. Thankfully, he has a habit of proving them wrong and making them look like fools, and I have no doubt that is not stopping anytime soon.